Hello, everyone. So hopefully everyone's enjoyed the last day and a half of the conference, and hopefully this will be equally as interesting as the rest has been. So today I'm going to talk through how to drive towards continuous deployment with a value stream map. And I'll get into what a value stream map is as we go through the talk. What I'd like everyone to be able to take away from this, the next half hour, is three things. One is that value stream maps are about how you deliver, not what you deliver. Secondly, that it's all about confidence at the end of the day, and I'll kind of go into that in a little bit more detail as we go through. And the third one that's potentially contentious, but I do truly believe this, is that continuous deployment is a realistic target for over 90% of teams. And I'll talk through where that 10% lies towards the end of where I think that it potentially isn't the right choice. Unfortunately, I have to do an obligatory about me slide. So I'm Josh, I'm a principal consultant at Contino. I work with regulated enterprises, driving digital transformation, looking at ways of working, all these kind of things. And this approach with the value stream map is something that I've been doing as a consultant as a day one activity for probably about 4 years now, because it's the single easiest way I've ever found of understanding how a team works and getting them to look at it and drive kind of that continuous improvement style of looking at how they work and how they want to change it. I'm also a AWS Partner Network Ambassador and a HashiCorp Ambassador, so I do a lot of writing, I do a lot of talks, I kind of get around putting my thoughts down on page. So if this is interesting, feel free to look me up on LinkedIn or kind of around the places, Twitter, all those kind of things, because I do this stuff quite a bit. So I just want to start by just defining continuous deployment, so we're all on the same page about what it is I'm actually talking about. So the definition I like to use is from a commit being merged into a shared branch. It is deployed into production with no human involvement. And I think we'll kind of come back to the human aspect of that quite a lot as we go through. And really, to just kind of boil it down, is it's about maximizing the amount of time you spend delivering value. So, and I'll kind of talk into what kind of activities deliver value in a second as we talk through a few different mental models that I think help frame why this is important and why this is valuable. And I also think it's important to be able to sell this idea within the business as well. I think every engineer has come up along the, we want to pay down this technical debt, we want to invest in this, and someone in the business turned around, but I want this feature. So, being able to have those conversations, explain why this is important, what impact it will have, is really key to being able to actually progress down this journey. So value stream maps come from lean thinking out of the Toyota production system out of Japan from the 60s. And other things that lean tells us is that there are three types of activity you can do throughout your work. You can have value generating activities, you can have necessary waste, and you can have unnecessary waste. Now, I'm not going to dive into the lean definition of waste and all that this time, but instead just on those three action types, just looking at what we want to do with each of those. What's the general approach? And generally, this is something people can very easily come to themselves, but we want to maximize the amount of time we spend on value generating activities. And we want to minimize the amount of time we spend on necessary waste. And we want to eliminate unnecessary waste as we go through. So when I boiled down continuous deployment to maximizing the time spent delivering value, really continuous deployment is about minimizing and getting rid of waste. And we'll talk through where waste appears in software development processes as we go through. Another thing that I found critical as part of framing this approach is being able to articulate and describe what good software delivery looks like. Because often teams that have worked in enterprises for a long time, they work within their own sphere or bubble, and sometimes they're not aware of other things that have happened out there in the world, or it's been the same team for 5 to 10 years and they haven't had this kind of like fresh thought come through. So where I like to go with this is the 2013 book Accelerate and the series of State of DevOps reports that have come out of the Dora Institute over the last 7 or 8 years. And the key bit from those that I want to hone in on today is that they give you 4 metrics that you can measure that gives you a very good indication of what your software delivery performance looks like. And those are lead time, which is how long a change takes to get from being merged into production, how long a change takes to getting into production from being merged, deployment frequency, which is how many times you deploy to production every day, time to restore service, which is how long when something breaks until it comes back, and lastly, change failure rate. So for every change you make, how many of those actually cause a problem for end users? Now, I believe the only way to hit all 4 of these goals simultaneously and be elite is to do continuous deployment. If you're not doing continuous deployment, I don't know how you get here. Or you're throwing so many people at the problem that you're starting to really incur a lot of waste and a lot of cost that you don't want to have. And the third and last kind of framing model that I want to quickly touch on is batch sizes. So again, this is coming from lean thinking quite a lot, but what the maths, even at the end of the day, with queuing theory at the bottom tells us is that smaller batches are less risky, they move faster, and they're more predictable. Those are all the kind of properties we want to have. We want to get our work through with less risk, faster, and with more predictability. So these are all good things. And the reason I talk about this is really, this is why people invest in CI/CD in the first place, even if they're not quite framing it in this way. But when you look at batch sizes, there are 2 costs to every batch of work. There is the transaction cost, which is, in a software sense, the cost it takes to get that work into production. And then there's the holding cost. Now, holding cost, when I think about it, is about, I mean, I don't know how everyone else on the call will feel, but generally I find if I've written code a week ago, it might as well have not been me writing it in the first place. So then if I have to wait 2 weeks or a month for that code to hit production, then it breaks, I might as well have not been the one who wrote it if I go to debug it. So a lot of the time in holding cost is just the risk induced over time from lack of understanding, moving on to other initiatives, and all those kind of things. And as we embrace CI/CD pipelines, what we're doing is we're lowering that transaction cost and making it easier to get to production, which is then allowing us to do smaller batches and then get that less risk, make it move faster and make it more predictable, which is all things we want. And it's things that the business wants as well. So now we've framed kind of the mental models that surround the process and surround how we want to look at the world. We'll get a little bit into more of how you actually approach it. So value stream mapping exists within kind of a wider wrapper. And within Lean, there is a concept of a Gemba walk. Now, when you actually go back to full manufacturing, this is going and having a walk along the assembly line, going and look how it works, taking a non-judgmental eye, but just being open-minded about what could be changed, what could be improved, and how the process works. And value stream mapping is the easiest way of being able to get that kind of pipeline and that view of the process on a page so people can look at it and talk about it. And when we look at the Gemba walk process in a little bit more detail, what we're going to talk about today is only points 4, 5, and 7. So be where the value stream is, go and sit with the team. This is not something that's done in isolation. This is a whole team activity that you go through. Record your observation, don't make suggestions. So I think one of the things I really like about this process is, done with the right mentality, it becomes something that the team drives for themselves. As a consultant, when I come in and do this, I'm very much facilitating. I'm not participating. And I think whoever is driving this within the team needs to take a similar approach and make sure you're facilitating the conversation and the process, not participating and going, well, we should change this, change that. That comes with the follow-up, where you go from present state to future state. And again, I will kind of talk through that as we go through, but it's important to just allow people to talk about the world as it is without getting sidetracked in conversation about what you want to change. And often as a consultant, I believe I am the impartial observer mentioned in part 6 because I have no vested interest, no history with the team. This is something I do on day one, so I can be as impartial as possible. But if you're in a bigger company, potentially getting someone from another team or someone from elsewhere in the business to come and be part of this process and just ask the dumb questions that everyone else knows the answer to. But sometimes that's really critical to driving assumptions out and then challenging those. Okay, that's enough preamble. So now we're going to go into value stream maps. So what I'm going to show today is a very simplified version of value stream maps. They are, to a degree, somewhat a discipline unto themselves, and you can go very deep on them. But instead, what I've tried to do is find something that's achievable in about 30 minutes to an hour and really drives the maximum value out of that time. You could spend a week doing a value stream map, but generally when you're looking at the software process, you're going to not get value out of the first half a day. And generally I found that hours a good amount of time to take this first initial stab at the problem. So what you're going to do is, in some ways, quite simple. You're going to draw the process that takes an idea to actively generating value. And you're going to draw everything that happens in between those points. And because nearly everyone in the world is an agilist these days and hasn't had enough time spent sticking post-it notes up on walls, that's exactly what we're going to do here as well. So all you need for this is post-it notes, some markers, and a whiteboard. Obviously, unfortunately, we can't generally be together in person right now. So I've done these with Miro or other online tools that are effectively blank space plus post-its. And this is very low tech for a reason, because it's quick and easy to do. You're not enshrining this in code. You're not using tools to generate your pipelines. You're just drawing down the process as it really is in a quick way. Now, I have found that it is generally really valuable to use a few different colors. And generally, when it comes to software delivery, one of the key things I want to understand is how the branching strategy actually works. How does the branching impact everything that's going on? So often I'll pick a particular color for a particular branch, because then it just makes it very easy to visually see where the jumps between branches are and all that kind of thing. And generally, once you've got this up on a whiteboard, up on Miro, you can kind of just go, okay, this is what we're trying to do. Team, go at it. Start drawing this up. Now, you want to have open conversations as things go along so people can challenge, especially if you've got junior members of the team. They'll probably go, I didn't know that. Or you'll see things where people are putting things up on the board, but they almost feel near ashamed that they're having to put it up on the board. They know that it's not what they want to be doing, but it is what they are doing. And often you'll end up with a bunch of ideas of improvements that the teams wanted to make for 6 or 12 months, yet they haven't had the opportunity to do so. So often it's just actually getting people to vent their frustrations that's part of the value. And generally, if you've got business people in the room, they will listen to those and go, oh, I didn't realize that people were this unhappy. So as you start mapping this out, what you want to do is do this for one feature, like a feature going through to production. Don't worry about having 20 feature branches because you have 20 feature branches going at once. Generally, just do it for one feature, that one idea going through the value. And what you'll end up with is something that looks like this. Now, I know this will be too small. You can't read it. That's fine. We're going to blow it up and go into a little bit more depth. But generally, even kind of zoomed out, you can see a flow. So there's 3 branches. You can see there's kind of a shared branch, there's a feature branch, and then there's some green branch at the end. So even looking at this, I think most people would recognize this as Git flow or Git flow-esque. Maybe it's GitHub flow or something like that. But this is something that generally people can understand and go, okay, I've seen this before, which is awesome. And what I want to do now is just drill in a little bit more, again, based on those metrics that we looked at towards the start. So the two throughput metrics that were identified by Accelerate were deployment frequency and lead time. And on this value stream map, we can see the steps that go into determining those. We have a deploy to production step that gives us our deployment frequency. How often does that actually get done? And it also gives us that lead time of from that commit being merged, how long does it take to get to production? Now, very commonly when I start with a team doing this, the numbers, especially when they're starting to go through Agile for the first time, maybe they're doing Safe, they're doing Scrum, and they may have got to about this stage where they're deploying every 2 weeks, they're deploying once a sprint, and that gives you the idea that the lead time is about 2 weeks. When we look at those numbers and compare them to elite teams, we're about 10 times slower than where we want to be. What we want is a deploying to production multiple times per day and a lead time of less than a day. So from that branch being merged, we want it into production within a day. Now, often when you go through this process and you put the numbers up and you framed it correctly with where other teams are, people start challenging, they start having conversations, they start going, well, we can't do this. Or hopefully they go, okay, in order to do this, we have to change something. And the framing I like to use, and this kind of comes back to the key takeaways all the way at the start, is that when you're deploying to production, this entire process, everything between idea and production that isn't actively writing code is really only trying to serve one purpose. And that's trying to build confidence. What you're trying to do through this process is you're trying to become confident that the value of doing a release is greater than the risk of doing the release, and normally with some buffer in between the two as well, right? You're trying to say that the chance of us breaking something when we deploy this is small, and the value we're going to get is much bigger than that. That's pretty much all you're trying to do. That's all testing is trying to do, your CI process and all that kind of stuff. This is all about just building confidence that we can release it into production. Testing is not about proving the non-existence of bugs, just by the by, because you can't do that. And when we kind of look at the process we had, I see there's kind of 3 sections here that are about building that confidence. One is the CI run, where we run all our tests. We do all that kind of good stuff. Another section is the pull request review, generally very common on teams, and you're getting a second pair of eyes to look and go, yep, this code looks good to me. The third part in the process that we had is the quality assurance, the regression testing, and generally what I find is quite often a manual QA team here, which acts as a gate to production. They have to run a test. And when you look at it in terms of time, if you go through and look at each of these steps in turn, you'll end up with your CI run and your peer review. They don't take that long. They're fine. They're not the bottleneck on your process. The bottleneck on your process comes from the manual QA team, who you have to wait for their availability, which can generally take quite a long amount of time because they need kind of static branching, static environments. And even the manual QA test, quite commonly, because it's manual, can take multiple days to do. This is a really, really expensive way to try and get that confidence, right? This is so expensive because we're having to wait a long, long time and invest a lot of human effort into this. And when we kind of look at QA again, there are 2 different things that QA are trying to do here. They're trying to do exploratory testing of new features, and they're doing regression testing. Now, those should really be 2 separate things. With regression testing, that's a feature we've tested 100 times. Why haven't we automated that? Surely that should be automatable. They have test scripts that they're running. We could automate it. Exploratory testing is hard to automate because it's exploratory. It's not something you've done before by the very nature of it. So that can't really be automated all that much. So instead, what we need to do is split these up. And again, to kind of come back to the models we wanted to use to frame this, what we're talking about here is the necessary waste is a QA testing. The process that they're doing is something we need to do to generate that confidence. So it's very much falling into that minimization bucket. The unnecessary waste is that having to wait on the QA. There is no reason we should have to wait for regression testing or for building that confidence, right? So when you start looking at it through this, it's okay, well, let's get rid of the wait and let's minimize the amount of time we spend on QA testing. It's not that it's not valuable, it's just that we need to approach it a different way. And after doing that, and you have these conversations, the next step is mapping out what the future state will be. You know where you are, where do you want to be? What do you want it to look like? And generally, hopefully, teams will end up with something that looks a bit more like this. You'll notice that the development branch has completely disappeared because now, because we can automate all regression testing, we can deploy to production without needing a stable branch tip. We can do this continuous deployment. We can just go, it's merged, all the tests pass. If that's the case, I am happy. I am confident that I haven't broken anything. And when we kind of zoom in a little bit more, we can see now we've got this exploratory testing piece that actually happens after things are deployed to production. Now, potentially, in this case, if you're delivering a new feature, you might not want to release it to everyone in production straight away. And this is where feature flagging, canary deployments, blue-green deployments, you have options here about de-risking your deployment. But what you need to do is you need to split the concepts of deployment and release into two separate things. And once you do that, you can deploy to production all you want, but the release becomes something that is a process unto itself. But that's what you want, because it allows you to match the right release process for what it is you're deploying. If you're deploying bug fixes, you really shouldn't need to do exploratory testing because you're fixing stuff that should be covered under your automated testing. If you're releasing something new and you want to see how that works in production, then you can do a feature flag to only enable your QA team to look at it, or do canary deployments where you roll it out slowly over time, or just do blue-green where you roll back in case of a failure. You have these options. And to be honest, if you want to do continuous deployment, you need to invest in being able to use these. Now, I did say, this is, people will probably say that, this is not possible. This is, too pie in the sky thinking, but I've gone through this journey with teams and it's worked. And I think one of the really powerful things is they're a lot happier 3 months down the line once they've gone through this process and they've invested and they've upskilled and got to this point. Everyone's just happier, which is a wonderful thing to see. I did say I'd quickly touch on when this kind of continuous deployment doesn't work. There are two reasons that I've found where continuous deployment is not the right option. One is when there's inherently high risk of change, like you're not going to deploy every code to production if you're operating the Mars rover or lander or something like that. You're just not going to do that because the risk of it going wrong is so high. The other one is inherently cost of change. Now, in a previous role, I used to work for a machine learning startup where the deployment process was me jumping on a 20-hour round trip flight. I didn't want every single change every developer had going into production because the cost of me having to go and fix something was another 20-hour flight. So in that case, we didn't do continuous deployment. We did continuous delivery, but we kept stable release candidates because we needed to run long form testing that took a couple of weeks before the operations team was comfortable to deploy that. So there are cases where it doesn't work. The one excuse I sometimes get is it's too expensive. And I don't think this is legitimate. Partly because when you actually look at the numbers, with those 4 metrics that we identified, 1 in 5 teams is already there based on the statistics and research. And that number grows every year. So when it comes to the business, it's kind of like you can't afford not to invest in this because you'll be left behind. If you're in a competitive space, if other people are doing this and you're not, you're going to find it really hard and you're going to be forced to do this eventually anyway. And when it comes to kind of reselling internally, again, when I come back to the smaller batches, like what business doesn't want to have less risky deployments? What business doesn't want to move faster? And what business doesn't want more predictability? Investing in this gives the business what it wants. So when you start to frame it the right way, these become normally fairly easy conversations to have about, we want to invest time in this. This is what we're going to get out of it. And being able to contrast this against the value of the features that will be delivered instead in that time. So I just want to very quickly circle back on the 3 key takeaways. So the first is that value stream maps are about how you deliver, not what you deliver. These are about continuous improvements. They're not performance reviews. The secondly is that software delivery really, and CI/CD, when it comes down to it, is all about confidence and building confidence. And when you look at it through that lens, you can start to see things in a slightly different light. And the third is that continuous deployment is a realistic target for over 90% of teams. Especially in the era of the cloud, your cost of change should be near zero and your risk should be near zero. In those cases, continuous deployment is an amazing fit and will actually make everything easier. Thank you. Yes, finished.